agenda being more left or less left?
Yeah, I mean, as you point to with the recent victories from these candidates, Mamdani, Spanberger, et cetera, they are, I think, winning mainly because of voters being frustrated with the current administration, that they haven't truly felt the relief economically yet. And so we live in a time of affective polarization where voters are usually voting against the other side instead of for themselves. And so what that means is that the core issues that led Democrats to lose in 2024, I think, are still unresolved. You know, we're talking about Dick Cheney today, who was kind of a symbol of interventionist wars in the mid-2000s, and now you see how much he was embraced by Democrats in the last election. I think that's a sign of how the old country club Republicans passed their membership on to the latte liberals. And now the Liberal Party, the Democrats, I think really have to reinvent themselves to be more working class and more populist.
I want to talk about the shutdown. Democrats made a decision. Some of them broke away from the party and decided to end it. How do you think that plays out for the party, even in the midterms? Because some people were looking to them in the party to hold firm and strong, and others were saying, we're literally suffering. Can you end this?
Yeah, I think this is a good example of the latte liberalism going too far, because the government shutdown really hurt a lot of ordinary Americans. You had 40 million people struggling to eat because of the SNAP benefits. You had millions of government workers going without a paycheck. And at the same time, you had the elites in the party saying that we should traffic in what I call Ted Cruz 2013 politics, which is to shut down the government over healthcare policy, instead of really looking out for ordinary Americans. So I definitely support the expansion of the Obamacare subsidies, but I don't think you do that during a government shutdown. And so I do think this is a key debate that's happening in the party between the elites and the grassroots.
What about Democratic leadership? Are people like Chuck Schumer and Hakeem Jeffries equipped to lead the party into the next whatever it is? There is so much frustration with them among rank-and-file Democrats from both directions, from a more progressive direction and from a more moderate sensibility.
Yeah, well, I think with Schumer, you see this issue of the gerontocracy. I think
Yes.
so many Democrats and Americans are ready to turn the page on the Schumer generation of leadership. With Hakeem Jeffries, it's more interesting because getting back to how the Democratic Party reinvents itself culturally, the party needs to do something different. I think anti-corruption would be a fantastic issue for Democrats. You hear John Ossoff talking about it. And Hakeem Jeffries, one of his 3 pillars going into a potential speakership would be anti-corruption. I've spoken with him about this. Something different, like, for example, can we ban lobbyists from legally bribing members of Congress, which is a huge problem. Left or right, I think, would agree with this, but would a new Democratic leadership take on an anti-corruption issue like that? There's a possibility that Hakeem Jeffries could lead on that and change the brand going into 2028.
I think everyone looked to New York and said, oh my gosh, Mamdani, this means so much. I think a lot of that was overplayed. But what is the actual Mamdani effect that the Democratic Party now has to grapple with?
I think it could go one of a few ways. I think there's a sort of ideological direction and there's a stylistic direction. I hope for sure that Democrats take some notes stylistically, because getting back to this cultural change, I think Democrats too long have been a party of we know what's best for you instead of we want to listen to you. And Mamdani's campaign, which I love so much, was about listening and not lecturing. And I think that is stylistically a way that Democrats need to go. Now, ideologically, we'll see how Mamdani governs. There are some parts of his agenda that are pretty far left, and we'll see how much he gets into governing and delivering results. This affordability issue obviously is the big issue now. If he can deliver on that, then I think there's some policy wins that Democrats could take nationally.
But he calls himself a democratic socialist.
Yeah, that's true.
Is that gonna, who wants, Abigail Spanberger has said, don't ever use that word again. And I don't know, Republicans are gonna be really happy to be running against someone like him, someone like AOC.
Well, certainly the Republicans think that, because the day after Mamdani won, they sent out a bunch of emails comparing people like my friend Zach Walz, who's running for a U.S. Senate in Iowa, to Mamdani. You know, I think, when you think about some of the candidates that Democrats are recruiting, I think about Rebecca Cook, who's running in a key swing district in western Wisconsin. She's a strong recruit who's not going to be running in the Mamdani lane. She's not trying to call herself a democratic socialist. I think they're trying to define their own brand. But again, they got to do something different. That you showed the polls. Democrats have won these races despite their approval ratings not going up. So you need a brand and a message and a culture to the party that's going to increase that. I'm not sure democratic socialism does that.
Now, 11 months into a new president and a new year, people are wondering how come Democrats haven't come up with a strategy yet, besides trying to find their version of Joe Rogan or anything of the sort, that's actually realistic and taps into some of the reasons why they lost the election. What's your response to that? Why do you think that? Or what have you heard something that Robby and I haven't come across our desk yet?
I think there has been, there's this comical conversation after the 24 election about Democrats needing their version of a Joe Rogan, spending millions of dollars to attract young men back to the party. And I think a lot of that should have been laughed at appropriately. But now I think you're seeing a little bit more of a move towards let's show up and talk to everyone. I see that among people like Ro Khanna. I see that among people like Pete Buttigieg, who are going on those different podcasts. Even Gavin Newsom, who obviously represents more of the, I would say, the establishment wing of the party, he's been asking Joe Rogan to go on his podcast for months and months, and Rogan hasn't let him on. So that is actually a positive development, in my view, for the Democrats, that they're not afraid to go into unfriendly territory.
Real quick, on the Republican front, I mean, the big advantage Democrats have is that Trump is not going to be on the ballot ever again, and
we
Democrats, hope not. Well, but you don't hope. You hope not, because he boosts Republicans. Yeah. There are voters that turn out for him and might not turn out for J.D. Vance or whoever.
Yeah, exactly. So look at 2024 in many key swing states like Wisconsin, Arizona, where Trump won and the Democratic U.S. Senate candidate won on the same ballot in the same election. And the reason for that, if you look at the turnout numbers, was that Trump had a unique level of turnout that did not translate to other Republicans. Will that translate to J.D. Vance remains to be seen. J.D. Vance, although he's seen as sort of like mini Trump, he's a different kind of cat politically. I've known him for some time, and I'm not convinced yet that J.D. can get that same level of turnout.
Stephen Olikara, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me.